Welcome back to another Crusty Cravings video. Today I'm going to teach you how to make my organic spelt sourdough loaf. I absolutely love this flour combo. I think it has such a rich, bold, and deep flavor with the spelt flour. You could use whole wheat instead, but I do recommend using a high protein flour with this recipe. Combine 350 grams of warm water with 100 grams of active sourdough starter. If it's 100% hydration, it should float in water. I love the organic unbleached all-purpose flour from Kirkland. It is a white label flour from Central Milling, and it is known to be their ABC Plus flour, just at a cheaper price, which you really can't beat. It's 11.5% protein, which makes it really great for sourdough bread, and I just combine that with 50 grams of spelt flour or whole wheat flour from Central Milling. A lot of people will tell you to mix your dough into a shaggy ball, and I misunderstood that when I first started, so I like to say mix until all the flour is incorporated and there's no major chunks. You really can't over mix your dough. I like to just make sure it's very smooth and an even consistency. I like to do a fermentation, which is where I wait 1 hour and I add salt later. I think it helps with gluten development, it helps the dough strengthen, and it makes it less sticky overall and easy to work with. I add 10 grams of salt and I knead that by hand until it's very well incorporated. This is another chance to strengthen your dough and make sure that you're building the gluten and developing it. I cover my dough with a shower cap and let it sit for 1 hour. A lot of people will tell you to let your dough bulk ferment on the counter overnight until it is doubled in size. The reason this is wrong is every dough temperature takes a different amount of time to ferment, and warmer dough will ferment faster. I follow something called the Aliquot Method, which is just an aid to help me nail my bulk fermentation. You can take screenshots of these 2 slides, and this will really help you in nailing that bulk fermentation. All I'm doing is taking a small dough sample and sticking it in a 2-ounce sample cup and putting the lid on and sticking that in my dough so it holds the same temperature. When my dough of that sample cup hits the lid and is wanting to explode from the cup, I know I have achieved my percentage rise target. Every dough temperature needs to rise a different percentage, and for me, having 80 Fahrenheit dough, it needs to only increase by 30% of the original volume. There are so many different techniques that you can do during stretch and folds. You can do coil folds, which is what I'm doing here, and that is where you take both hands, grab underneath the middle of your dough, pull up as far as you can, and fold it underneath itself, like a coil, if you will. You can do stretch and folds, which I'll show here in a little bit, and you can do slap and folds, which is where you take your dough and slap it on the counter, pick it up, slap it again. You can also laminate your dough during the second or third set of stretch and folds to really strengthen the gluten network, the gluten matrix, strengthen your dough overall, build elasticity, and ultimately allow your dough to trap carbon dioxide that will be able to lift your bread. I prefer to do my stretch and folds every 30 minutes and do 3 to 4 sets in total. Some people advocate to wait an hour in between. Some people forget a set of stretch and folds altogether, and I think that if your starter is very strong and active, you can skip a stretch and fold here and there, and you can also go an hour in between, and it's not going to make a significant difference, but you're just allowing your gluten to relax in between these stretch and folds every 30 minutes, and then you're re-stretching it to build that elasticity and strengthen it. If you did it too soon, the gluten will not have relaxed and it'll be much harder to stretch it. I like to show the progression of what your dough would look like during stretch and folds. Because I did a fermentation and advocate for that, my gluten had already developed by the time I did my first set of stretch and folds. But say you were to mix all of your ingredients together at the beginning, wait 1 hour and start stretch and folds, your dough would likely be very sticky during that first set, but every set of stretch and folds is going to strengthen your dough, build elasticity, and build that gluten matrix, and it should be a smooth and cohesive ball by that third set or fourth set of stretch and folds. 5 hours after time of mixing in starter to now time of shaping, my dough was ready. My Aliquot sample had completely filled and the dough was touching the lid, so it was ready to go ahead and dump it out and shape it. The other signs you're looking for is that it's less sticky because the gluten is developed, it's pulling from the sides, it's domed, it's starting to form big bubbles, it's jiggly, and again, it should come pretty cleanly out of the bowl and be less sticky because the gluten is so developed. I don't think a clean dough dump is necessary to have perfectly proof dough, but it is very satisfying. If I was making bread for customers, this is where I would section off my dough and weigh it on a food scale into 875 gram balls for full size or 450 grams for minis. All you have to do now is take your dough and form it into a cohesive ball. I always say this is like a candy cane motion or a push and pull motion where you are just tightening your dough into a cohesive ball and letting it sit there on the counter for 30 minutes to relax before the final shaping. After 20 to 30 minutes of bench resting, the gluten will have relaxed just a little bit. You're going to flip it over and start doing your final shaping. A lot of shaping is very intuitive and dependent on the baker. Even if there are methods like the tartine method or the caddy class method, everybody has their own take on it, and I think the key is being kind to your dough and not stretching it further than it can naturally go. I see people flattening out their dough, popping all the gas bubbles, laminating, and you're just destroying a lot of the hard work you just did during bulk fermentation, which is going to allow your bread to rise. So I say be kind to your dough, don't stretch it too far, allow those gas bubbles to exist, and do your own take on shaping, form, surface tension. That will allow your bread to get a good oven spring, but ultimately be kind. Stitching is not a necessary part in the bread making process, but I do prefer it. I find that it builds more surface tension, which allows my bread to have a better oven spring. It ultimately sucks in everything and creates a cohesive ball, and I just like the way that it looks better as well. But I have a lot of friends that don't stitch their dough and it looks completely fine. I also have friends that stitch right away after final shaping and friends that wait 15 minutes. Again, you can have your own take on it and be intuitive and just do what works for you. I gently cover my loaves with a cheesecloth and I let that sit in the fridge for 12 to 24 hours. I find that it develops the flavor and makes it way easier to score when you do a long cold proof. This is the poke test. What I'm looking for here is an initial quick spring back and a slow fill in. This tells me that my loaf is perfectly proofed. If it didn't spring back at all, it would be significantly overproofed, and if it was springing back all the way in immediately, it would be underproofed. Scoring is a personal preference. A lot of people love to be artistic because this is their work of art. Some people just like convenience or quick decorative scores. Some people prefer just one slash down the middle or off to the side. I think again this comes down to personal preference. I've had a lot of people ask me how to get that ear that everybody desires. And I hate to say it, but the majority of the ear comes from the proofing. And if you didn't nail that during bulk fermentation, it's going to be pretty tough to get that perfect ear that everybody wants. Here I'm just doing a quick decorative score down the side. It is not necessary. You could do just 1/2 inch deep cut down the middle or off to the side, and that would give you enough of a cut that will allow your bread to expand exactly where you cut it. If you were not to score your bread and you did no deep expansion score, your bread would likely explode at the weakest point, and a lot of times that's off to the side or just breaking at the top, and a lot of it is just due to preference and wanting your loaf to have a controlled way of expanding. When I first started making sourdough almost 3 years ago, I only had a dull kitchen knife to score my bread, and I was finding that my loaves were exploding at the weakest point because I was not going deep enough and it was not sharp enough to really cut my bread in a clean way. So I do recommend getting a bread lom, even if that's the one tool that you invest in. A lot of them cost anywhere from $10 to $25. For the cheaper end, you can find them on Amazon, and for the more pricey and artistic bread lawns that have more safety features, I recommend Wire Monkey. If you are baking in a Dutch oven, you will have wanted to preheat your oven to 500 with your Dutch oven inside and get that thing nice and hot. I open bake and I have a tutorial on that here on YouTube. I have to generate steam because I don't have a lid or anything to trap steam on top of my loaves. That is what is going to allow my bread to rise, and so I have to continuously find a way to generate enough steam during half the bake, and I do that with lava rocks and boiling water in a cast iron skillet. I have found a way to bake 8 900-gram loaves on 2 baking steels in my home oven. It is electric, which makes it easier to open bake, but I do find that this has cut down my bake times significantly and just given me a way to be more efficient with my time and not have to buy a bread oven. Here I'm only showing 2 loaves on 1 baking steel, but I would just have 2 racks of baking steels and 1 skillet of lava rocks with boiling water at the bottom, and that is enough steam for me to bake 8 loaves at a time. Alright, this loaf has been sitting for about an hour cooling. You want to let your bread sit for about an hour to 3 hours and fully cool before you cut into it. The reason being is steam is still escaping from it, and this is part of the baking process. If you cut it too soon, there will be steam still inside and can make the texture of your bread more gummy, and we don't want that. So I'm going to cut into it and see how it turned out. Wow, this is such a weird crumb. Turned out great though. I'm pretty happy with that. Still a little bit hot, so ideally I should have let it cool for probably another hour. But overall, it turned out pretty good. What do you think, Diego?
I would say 8.5.
Really, what I look for more than crumb is the texture overall and the irregularity of the crumb. This could just be a shaping issue to have these holes down at the bottom and not at the top, but it could also be a proofing issue. I think this could have proofed just a little bit longer at room temperature, but I cut it off probably a little too soon. Overall, the texture is fine. It's not gummy, it's not dense. It's still like a light and fluffy loaf and has a good texture. But most importantly, I'm sure y'all are wondering, how did the sourdough taste? There's nothing like a warm piece of sourdough bread with butter. Even making this for over a year consistently every week, it still hits the spot. So good. So, I hope you liked this video. If this was helpful, please like and subscribe and share this video with your friends who are wanting to learn how to make sourdough bread. Thank you so much for watching.